All right, I'm very glad you all could stay for this presentation. It's been many months in arranging, but I'm very pleased to be able to introduce David Gerlich to our church here this morning as a representative of the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, where you have been employed since 2003? 2013. But David has a long history with Indian law and land issues. So the Indian Land, you'll probably go into this in great gory detail, but the Indian Land Tenure Foundation is national. It's community-based and basically serves American Indian nations and their people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. And as you know, we here at First UCC frequently cite in our land acknowledgement statement that we acknowledge our church was formed on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota Nation when the Dakota were being forcefully removed. So that's our land acknowledgement, and we've embraced that. And our committee is now the Beyond Land Acknowledgement Committee. So David is here to help us with some next steps, which include possibly a financial commitment. So please welcome David Gerlich to First UCC.
Thanks so much, Nancy, for your welcome. Thanks everyone here for extending a warm welcome to me. Nancy and I have been emailing since roughly last February, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, but what happened was, and I'll get into the history of the foundation as well. I've been working, I practiced law in Indian country from roughly, 1996. I went to law school late in life till about 2012. And then I went to work for the foundation where I'm the development officer, so I'm a fundraiser now. I'm no longer practicing. And I did a lot of work with two tribes. We worked primarily with Lakota Ray up around Hayward, Wisconsin, and Spirit Lake, Fort Totten. We did a lot of work with indigent people in Minneapolis. I worked with a guy named Larry Leventhal, who was a local legend. Larry did the Wounded Knee trials back with Bill Kunstler way back in the day. But I started with the foundation in 2013. And my boss and founder of the foundation, Chris Steinbrook, was out giving a presentation in Minneapolis at a local church. And the pastor came over to him afterwards, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but she said, "I think I've got something special for you." And she handed him an envelope, and that envelope had $250,000 in it. And with that, what we've done is we started what's called the Beyond Land Acknowledgement Fund. We've got many funds at the foundation. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And the response to the initiation of this fund has been overwhelming. And again, I'll address that a little bit later. But what we did, once we established the fund, our communications department did some research and quickly found out that there's at least 160 entities in Minnesota that have published these land acknowledgements. And there was some press in the Star Tribune. Chris, again, our founder, was interviewed. To a lot of Native folks, it's an important first step, but they see it kind of as empty words unless there's steps taken beyond. So we reached out to all these entities. We had their email addresses, and we said, "You've done something great. You've increased visibility, but now what are you going to do? We challenge you to do something more." And that's how we began our discussion. So I'm calling the talk Beyond Land Acknowledgements, taking the next step, and you are taking the next step. Thank each and every one of you for attending today. We consider this a next step. We consider book groups. We consider education within the church setting, and many churches that we're familiar with are doing educational programs about Native issues. It's not all about, well, we welcome, the money certainly helps. It's about raising awareness Many people have, I'm still learning something every week, I think, about Indian country. Unfortunately, the more you know, the worse it gets. But so much for that. Let's see. So what I'm going to do today is, first of all, I'm going to tell you that the foundation was created in 2002 by a community of Indian people, and they found out that there were four years of strategic sessions, and they realized that most of the inequities faced by Indian people across the United States are all directly related to land and the dispossession from that land. That land recovery is critical for the health and welfare of Indian people across the country. And what I'd like to do before getting into the weeds, I'm going to talk about two of the main issues that have really wreaked havoc in Indian country. Under the Dawes Act, the General Allotment Act of 1877, I'm going to talk about that. We're going to talk about checkerboarding really quickly, and then fractionation of Indian land. These are two topics that even when lawyers come up to me, say in the book group that I'm part of, and they say, well, explain allotment to me or explain fractionation, I can see them quickly glazing over, and I don't think it's just me. There have been whole books devoted to these topics, so I'm going to give you a very cursory introduction to both. Now, the General Allotment Act it happened in 1887, and you know, when Sherry Prestaman was talking, and she was talking about how quickly the landscape is changing and the religious landscape in the United States, I couldn't help but thinking how fast events were happening for Indian people across the United States. I've been doing some research in the Dakotas, so this is 1887. And you think of our neighbors next door. So you've got the Great Fort Laramie Treaty for the Lakota people, Nakota and Dakota peoples out west. And there's 1851 treaty, there's 1868 treaty. Custer comes along in 1874. He goes up into the Black Hills with about 1,000 people. It was supposed to be, you know, they had the big Gatling guns, they had the works. It wasn't just an expedition to look for gold. They were fully equipped to go to war if need be, and they embellished the size of the load there. So lo and behold, you get a lot of prospectors coming into the Black Hills, and then in 1877, next door, 1876 it was, you've got Sitting Bull and the Warriors wipe out Custer and the 7th Cavalry, and then you have, not too many years later, you have, and you can think about what's changing, the landscape, how quickly it's changing as the hordes of white people are coming into the land. And now you've got this character, Henry Dawes, a congressman, unfortunately, not unlike some of our Congress people today. I want to just, let's see, excuse me for a second here. I want to get to what she touched on another thing. Sherry, if I may call her Sherry, the sponsor of this bill actually stood up in Congress, and you heard her mention that David Brooks is bemoaning this, how this country has become a selfish country. So this is a direct quote from Dawes, who sponsored this act. They have gone, I keep slipping around here. He said, they have gone as far as they can go because they own their land in common. There is no enterprise to make your home any better than that of your neighbors. There is no selfishness, which is at the bottom of civilization. And generally, Indian folks, the land was now, every tribe is different. Many tribes across the United States still today, thankfully. They held their land in common. There were plots set aside for family groupings. It's not to say that, you know, individuals weren't working a specific area of land, but generally the land was held communally. So the Dawes Act says that they're going to divide up the land and essentially give each Indian person roughly a homestead, depending, and the acreage depended on gender, age, and position. Generally a quarter section, 160 acres. And with that land, they're now supposed to become good farmers. And a number of them did become farmers. A number of them became ranchers. Some of them today are in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I got to work on a project where I met many wonderful native ranchers. And what happened was, I think I can show you real quickly. So they're basically saying that without this ethos of greed and competition against their neighbors, Indian people are never going to become good citizens of this country. And if anyone says there's some controversy, some people will say that, well, Dawes was really meant to assimilate them in a good way and, make them something other than savages. Here's another quote from Dawes. To take the Indians out one by one from under the tribe, place them in a position to become an independent American citizen, and then before the tribe is aware of it, its existence as a tribe is gone. Now, the allotments were put into what's called trust for a period of 25 years. It was deemed that Indians were incompetent to hold their own land. Later on in 1906, there was another federal act called the Burke Act, and what the Burke Act said was you could take the land out of trust, that means held by the United States government. So the owners of the allotments didn't have title. The United States has title in these allotments. But you could take the land out of trust earlier than the 25-year period because more and more homesteaders are coming, and the land was sold for peanuts to the homesteaders. What happened, and let's see, even today, if a Native person wants to put their land in trust, and some of them do still want to keep it in trust, or the tribe wants to keep it in trust, the reason being the land is inalienable. It cannot be sold. It's one of the reasons Indian people cannot get mortgages generally on land within the reservation boundaries, which greatly hinders economic development. So the land that was not allotted was generally sold to corporations of the railroad or white settlers. Now, here you see the Rosebud Reservation. Most of us, and this is really kind of an epiphany for a lot of people, if you look at a map of the United States, there are, few reservations. You see these blots of land, these solid blots of land, much like you see here. So the Rosebud Reservation in southern South Dakota, that block was given to those people under treaty. And what happened with the allotment, after enough Native people didn't come to sign up for all the acreage within the reservation boundaries, the governments declared that land in excess or in surplus and quickly sold that land off. So let me show you the Rosebud Reservation today. This is what we call checkerboarding. Now all that white, that's fee land. That's the way you and I hold our land today. So that all went to white settlers. Now imagine all the havoc that this causes if someone wants to manage their natural resources. If they want to do zoning, they cannot do zoning on the fee land. For criminal jurisdiction, say the state, there were some recent cases in Oklahoma in which the perpetrators were prosecuted first under state law, where there was a death penalty, and they said, wait a minute, my crime was committed on federal land where there wouldn't be the death penalty. And what they do, you'll get a lot of, this is why there's part of the reason there's so much violence against Indian women in Indian country. The perpetrators will live within the reservation boundaries, and they'll often live across the street from the woman that they've assaulted because they go to the safe part of the reservation where the feds aren't going to prosecute because so many of the people, well, they go to law school, they've got a couple $100,000 of debt, they want to work for Enron on big cases, they don't want to prosecute a rape. That's not romantic in Indian country. So a lot of times those cases aren't even prosecuted. So it's just another thing that happened with this checkerboarding. It's a jurisdictional nightmare. And as the land base fractures, you can imagine that the culture starts to disintegrate as well. Now, right here in Minnesota, I can give you an example of this. So right in north central, are we there? Yeah, right in north central Minnesota, you've got the Leech Lake Reservation. Now this happened up at Leech Lake too. Leech Lake now holds, it's estimated between just 3 and 4% of their original reservation land base, which was, let me see how many acres, 973 square miles. And most of the ownership went to timber companies and settlers up there. So you have the little red dots. You have those little red dots up there. That's what's remaining tribal land. Here's a better depiction of it. That's all that's left. So again, most people don't realize this. I was giving a talk similar to this to the Minnesota Music Teachers Association. A woman stands up who does with transportation issues. So she was up at Leech Lake and they gave them a tour of the reservation. She said the tour lasted 5 hours because what they did with the people on the tour, they took them from red dot to red dot and they said, this is where we have actual reservation left. Now, the really insidious effect of the Allotment Act, it gets worse, it doesn't get better, is what's called fractionation. Under the Allotment Act, it directed that the estates of the Indian people, they should be divided for the heirs according to the state and territorial probate laws. So, and now the strange thing here is the land doesn't divide, the title divides. So with each generation of people passing, you can see the original allottee, the second generation gets a third, the third generation a ninth, fourth a 27th, fifth an 81st. What happens are, and this is not uncommon throughout the United States, some Indian people will say, I actually own a tablespoon of dirt. The fractionation, what it did was, it's like taking a map and just tearing it up and throwing it up into the wind. There are as many as 500, and in some cases 2,000 owners of an allotment on many reservations. So those of you who have been involved with any kind of probate issues, whether you're attorneys or you've been involved in family talks about assets that are passing, imagine sitting down, not just with your family, but with 100 or more people who have these undivided interests, where generally you need a majority consent to do anything. So what happens is the Bureau of Indian Affairs leases this land out to non-Indians, or these highly fractionated parcels. So you'll get a reservation, I have the statistic here it's the Crow Reservation. Out of 2.3 million acres, all of the 1.1 million acres of individual trust allotments are leased to non-Indians. Well, if those of you who are familiar with the Western lands, if it's mostly agricultural land, those are all non-native ranchers that are taking advantage of that land, which was originally in reservation boundaries. And there's no more industry within the reservation boundaries. So all the economic value goes right off the reservation. Our mission then, we're not out to take individual people in the United States, their land away from them. The mission, as you can read, it's land within the original boundaries of every reservation and other areas of high significance where tribes retain Aboriginal interest in lands are in Indian ownership and management. That is the mission of the foundation.
What happens then who gets the money from the leased land? I mean, it's theirs, they lease it out, you're saying, they're non-native people who lease it along, but they have to pay to lease it, correct?
Yeah, but they've leased that land for pennies on the dollar of what it's worth. Who gets the money for the leased land? Now we look because 90 million acres total were taken through DAWs. We see our mission as a long-term mission, 150 years. There's nothing short about it, what we're attempting to do. You could say that the recovery of, we often say, even when we do proposals, that the recovery of Indian land isn't America's favorite pastime. People are literally afraid that we're after their land. And we work through 4 strategies: education, economic opportunities, cultural awareness, and legal reform. About 80% of our efforts since 2002, when the foundation was established, have been dedicated to education, both the Indian public as well as the non-Indian public. The foundation was started with an endowment from the Northwest Area Foundation here in the Twin Cities of $20 million. And I'm proud to say that we have more than twice that on our books. And we've recovered, we estimate that we've helped recover or protect 130,000 acres of Indian land. ILTF, the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, is a hybrid foundation. It acts like a community foundation. It gives out grants. We also receive grants from the government, from foundations, and a great deal of individual giving. We manage 27 donor-advised or designated funds. Many of them have been, Indian country has asked us, because we have such a good record of financial management, we manage these funds, and under the plan for the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, in the last several years, those funds have gotten, from our investment pool, they've done better than the S&P, those that we hold. We've got working relationships, we're estimating, with approximately 140 Native nations at any time, and working with about 2,600 individual Indian people per year. Those are our estimates. And one of the things we do to reduce fractionation, we either make grants or we contract with groups of basically social interest attorneys that go out and they do will writing in Indian country. So we've done a lot of that, and that's primarily to reduce the fractionation of title. Many Indian people, it wasn't a common practice to be writing wills in Indian country. There are a number of Native nations that feel like if you mention death, they're going to get closer to it. I think there's many non-Indian people who have that same feeling and struggle with it. We also do, another thing we do, we deliver landowner trainings. So we send out our program officers, and they go out and they try to, they have discussions with Indian people about how they might convert their land to a good economic benefit. And they travel throughout the country doing that, how they might maintain a private economy on their land. And they address other topics of local relevance to those reservation communities. And primarily, we want them to be informed so they can have good information for future decisions. One of the publications, we do these, I think we've got 12 of these tabloids now. You can download them from online. They're called Message Runners. They're fantastic publications. I first became acquainted with this organization when I was still practicing law. These used to cross my desk, and I'd go, Little Canada, Minnesota. Who are those guys? Where are they? Because I'd never seen such professionally formatted and presented publications about fractionation and allotment in Indian country. And one of them that we did was just about all the documents, all the regulations, the red tape that Indian people have to go through with the feds in order to get anything done with their land. And people literally, from my understanding, they broke down and cried when they got that tabloid, because they said, I finally know what to do, and all these forms help. So that's the kind of education we like to provide. We co-host we try to help people lift themselves up by their bootstraps. It's not just about giving someone a pile of money. We do a national, this has become very well known. This conference started in 2011 in Las Vegas. We've since run it all over Indian country each year. And these are the land staff professionals from each tribe. Most tribes, not all, but most tribes have a land office. That land office functions like your county registrar of deeds. So they'll handle all the real estate transactions. Sometimes, depending on the size of the tribe, they might blend in natural resources in that office. They might have their mapping people, their GIS people. They also have their TIPOs, their tribal historic preservation people might be in that office. But here, a group of them, actually from Mille Lacs, came to us back at the onset in 2011, before I was on board, and they said, you know, we don't have a forum. Some of us have been doing this for 20 and 30 years. We've accrued some tremendous professional expertise. We could be mentoring other Native people and helping them. We could be teaching each other. So we started this conference, and I've been on the shuttle buses coming back from the conference to the airport, and you can't hear, they're so raucous. You should see what I've learned today about deeds. This is fantastic. And the excitement, the level of it, and we get presenters come in and do presentations from across the country. We get the creme de la creme of basically experts. My wife Sharon has been to a bunch of these conferences. She loves going there just because the information is so special. One of the retired folks from the Federal Reserve Bank just came to us. He's come to a number of these conferences, and he says what's so interesting is that you do have people networking. There's nothing like this for financial policy really in Indian country. It'd be neat if you had a conference like that. That wouldn't be us, but just to the value of this conference. I think last year we had, what did we have? I think 170, over 170 tribes have come, sent representatives since 2011. And we had 93 tribes last year at Pechanga, north of San Diego. Nearly 200 of the participants and 20 tribes were there for the first time. So I love that event. I'm going to really whip along here. We've got an online curriculum. I don't want to take too much of your time. We've got a for-profit organization, the Indian Land Capital Company, because the need for capital is so dire in Indian country, and many formal lending institutions will not lend to Indian people because they consider them a bad risk. ILCC loans for land acquisitions and economic development. They've put over $50 million of loans into Indian country without a single default since that got started. We've been involved with several sacred sites. The acquisition and preservation, Peshla is Lakota people call it the heart of everything, within the heart of everything. It's right in the heart of the Black Hills. And this is now reserved in perpetuity for ceremonial use by Indian people. It's almost miraculous that this happened. There were 2 acquisitions. We were involved. We've got another fund for Bear Butte. As for the Beyond Land Acknowledgements, here you'll see a land acknowledgement, which is a plaque on a rock, or it's more than a rock, it's out almost like a small boulder, out in California. And I didn't know about this tribe. It's the Karashti tribe. I think they're by San Jose. So it gives visibility. But what does it do beyond that? When I presented when we got involved with the Beyond Land Acknowledgement Fund, this amazing organization came to us. They're called CALM, the Conference of Academic Library Management. There's about 1,500 professional librarians that do a virtual conference each year. And they suggested that instead of taking a fee for the conference, that they give donations. And I was proud to give and honored to give the keynote. 770 people attended that keynote, and over 200 of them gave donations, and they still want to continue partnering with us. But they really struggled. They had, much like you've got a committee here, they had a committee that they told me beforehand how much they've struggled with these issues of what to do. Yeah, there's land acknowledgements, but now where do we go from here? And I told them, because they were librarians, you know, the analogy comes to mind, and I hope you'll entertain me. A land acknowledgement like this is kind of like putting a book up on a shelf. You see the title, and that's all you see. And in this day and age, I mean, many people don't even want books to see the light of day, as we know, as there's more censorship happening across the country. When I spoke to the Minnesota Music Teachers Association, I thought for them a good analogy might be it's like a musical score on a shelf. You might see the score of the piece, but until you play it, nothing's going to happen. I welcome everything you've done, just that, you know, you're having me here. This, like I said at the beginning, this is a way of moving beyond just the land acknowledgement. And that was Holy Trinity Lutheran Church that gave us that money. I do want to acknowledge them. We heard from community colleges, universities, in the Twin Cities, Metropolitan State University. I forget if she's the CEO or the president and her equity and diversity person. They came in to talk to us. They wanted us to know what they're doing. Rochester School System wanted us to know what they're doing. McAllister wanted us to know what they're doing. St. Catherine's College wanted us to know. Here, one of the board members from Lanesboro from the theater called me, what can we do? And I just made suggestions. You know, we've got a lot of Native playwrights. You've got a theater, bring in some Native people. Do something related to, Native culture. Like we say, I'm going to move, I'm ready to close here just about. Purchase Indian land when you go to auction, because of this misnomer that all Indians are wealthy because of gaming, and I need not get into the weeds there, but that's ridiculous. If they hear that Indian tribes are vying or want to purchase, the value skyrockets. The price goes very high. So, for example, around Bear Butte, the tribes that have been there for thousands of years, they don't have the proverbial, most of those tribes, can't get a nickel together to purchase land. Fortunately, we've been able to be involved with some. Right now, we're trying to get some money, hopefully from foundations, to maybe do a pool and endowment, so when land comes available, they can protect more of that particular site. Because now, if you're all aware of the Sturgis, bikers and everything, so there's all these huge bars that push up right against the base of the sacred butte, where they do the wet t-shirt contests and all that stuff, and the loud rock and roll, and campgrounds. So we're trying to get more native purchases in that area. Again, as far as resources, I encourage you, you can download these, and we'd be happy to send you some if you want for educational purposes. They're just fantastic publications, the Message Runners. More recently, another resource that I might mention, The Cost of Free Land. I was telling Nancy earlier about this book. An amazing journalist, Rebecca Claren, who's highly acclaimed. She's done writing about the American West for 20 years. And she's won a lot of awards. And after 20 years, her family, they happen to be Jews, they survived the pogroms, they came and they did hard scrabble farming in North Dakota. And so they lived in sod houses, they lived in those little claim shacks. And what she says is it took her nearly 20 years to realize, well, wait a minute, did my ancestors know that the land they were on was taken from Indian people? Did they have relations with them? What did they know? And she started talking to this native judge out west who's very famous, and the judge said, you should find out what your faith says about reparations. Learn, then maybe you can start talking to some Indian people. And Rebecca found a picture, which part of what started her search and her research was that she had an ancestor with a picture with a guy in a big headdress, and she found that family on the Standing Rock Reservation, and she started to get to know that family. So this book is an impassioned book, and what it does is it interweaves her own passion of writing about this. And she does these parallels. It's an interweaving of her family and what was going on in Indian country, cascading terrible federal policies. It wasn't enough to do allotment. It wasn't enough to do fractionation. Then they come for the kids. Then they relocate them to cities with little money that lasts maybe a month or two and take them away from their people. Then they start terminating tribes. And she's doing all of that while her family history is being recorded. It's incredible. And I think it's one of the best. Like I said, I've been in Indian country a long time now, and it's the best introduction to these land issues that I've come across. And my boss finally said, maybe it takes a book of this length to really get it across to people. It was just reviewed in the Christian Science Monitor. It's been reviewed by The Guardian. It's getting rave reviews, and I fully suspect it to get some great, win some awards. I'd like to introduce you to a guy. Let's see if I can. Let me back up here. No, it's not coming up. Hold on for a second. Let me see. Well, I'm not going to be able to show you that. It doesn't look like. This is my friend Ron Brownouter. Basically, is he's a very successful buffalo rancher on the Standing Rock Reservation, and this is a film that I had hoped to show you. And what it is a Ron basically takes you to his ranch where he runs generally between 400 and 600 head of buffalo on his original allotment from his grandmother, which was 23 acres, and he leases about 20,000 from Standing Rock. And Ron talks about why the land is valuable, and he says basically without it he wouldn't be happy. He wouldn't be happy, he wouldn't be excited. That'd be the end of his life if he didn't have that land. And in closing, I'm sorry I took a little bit more of your time than I had hoped. I really thank you for your interest and support. I'd be more than happy to entertain questions afterwards. I hope I can answer them or get back to you by email if I can't. And here's my information here. Thanks very much.
I believe our Secretary of the Interior is Native American. Is that correct? Yes. And so I'm interested in what you know, or what, if anything, the Biden administration is doing to assist in this work.
Part of what I know she's done is she's been very active in that Bears Ear region out west. That Trump summarily they did an executive order and they rescinded the protection for the area, and she's been involved with that. She generally makes good statements. I know she reinstated. I think what they did, part of what they did, they reinstated the gatherings where they bring in Native leaders and speak to them. I do know that the head of FSA right now, the Farmer Service Administration under USDA, is a Native guy, Zach Ducheneau. He's as good a guy as they could possibly have there. He's on behalf of, for Indian agricultural needs. Zach comes from Standing Cheyenne River Reservation, and he was the former executive director of Intertribal Agriculture Council. They aren't, the famous scholar, Lakota scholar Vine Deloria once said the BIA is still was part of the War Department originally. They're still making war on the Indians. And in fact, Rebecca says in her book, as she goes through it, she goes, if you're depending on the BIA here, and I shouldn't say this, I'm being recorded, but she says, you might have amnesia if you think that the government's going to fulfill its trust responsibility to Indian people. It seems to have withered quite a bit. Yet when you send out surveys to Indian people, half of them will tell you they want to keep the trust relationship. Half of them will say no, it's rotten. We don't want to keep it. Ultimately, what we'd like to see is some kind of a land title that is native land title. This is something a First Nation has done up in Canada, where their land was valued at maybe a couple $100 an acre. Now it's over something like $1 million an acre, because they can tax within their boundaries, and even the mayor of that local town has moved there, who used to say disparaging things about those First Nation people. But that's probably, that's very aspirational. We do ourselves try to change federal policy. We're now working, there was the Merriam Report back in about 1934, maybe the 20s, went over all the bad things that were still happening in Indian country, stopped allotment and different things, which was memorialized in the Indian Reorganization Act. So we're going to we're trying to raise money. We've got a crew working on 100 years later, what has changed in Indian country. I know that when Elizabeth Warren was running, she put out like 14 pages of things that could be done in so many different areas of Indian country. So some of that they're trying to do. During the Obama administration, there was a Civil Rights Commission, I think, that put out a good piece on Indian education that is worth taking a look at, that shows how Native people, for the most part, are still invisible. Even a guy from the Brooks Institute, I just heard him on a Zoom call for this Miriam report said that in education circles, they're not even reported. If you look at minority reports, what's happening to minorities as far as educational needs in the United States, sometimes Indian people won't even be mentioned. You got blacks, Hispanics, some of the other minorities, but they remain invisible. So thankfully, you're seeing, I think some good things are happening. I think Rebecca's book will do some good things right now. You're seeing, there was I think the last issue of Sierra Club magazine, there were like 7-page spread on land back. Chris was quoted extensively throughout it. We, not all that long ago, were able to work with the Land Conservancy, I think, Land Conservation Fund, to recover 28,000 acres at Bois Forte of their forest, of their original forest, and that was the largest, I think, in the history of the United States, land going back to Indian people. And we were very much involved with that. So some good things are happening. And I'm sorry I'm not directly answering your question. I'm not totally tied into what the feds are doing. Chris does go from time to time and will testify in front of Congress on some of these issues. Yes?
My understanding of Indian land is is marginal. So when you decide to buy something back, how is it vetted?
How is it?
Well, how do you prioritize what you're going to buy back?
For us, well, that's a good question. Most of the land that I'm aware of, I haven't been directly involved in those transactions. That would be Indian Land Capital Company that, for us, buys land back, and they've got a set of requirements. They never ask for land as collateral, which a bank would, because they don't want to jeopardize the land in any way, shape, or form. And the last thing that the tribe wants to default on is a loan for land that they're getting back. So they pay those notes. They do write the equivalent, it's my understanding, of a note that they're going to pay that money back, and they do. When we're working with, say, we're involved on the administrative end, we might help raise money. We get attorneys involved, for example, for Pesh Law, that holy land in South Dakota. We just brought on board attorneys, and later they did put the land in trust because the county kept vying. They wanted to tax that land, and once it got into trust, they could no longer tax that land. So in fact, we had interns this summer. I think there were 4 in total. 1 worked in our office, and they were overseeing, and what they did was they were putting together a catalog of transactions, land transactions, that have gone back to Native people. Because people ask your question, how do I go about doing this if I want to transfer land back? Usually, the land that's valuable to the tribe is going to be within its reservation boundaries or next to it. So they can do, or sacred, outside, like we say in our mission statement, other areas of importance. And one point that I didn't make, these aren't going to be large parcels that we get back because of the cost of land saved through the Beyond Land Acknowledgement Fund, but they might be former hunting grounds, near fisheries, or sacred spots that are very important to the tribes. So they're of immense importance.
I think that
Briefly say, what percentage of the land is in crop or irrigated land versus other uses?
You know, I don't have that figure for you, but we did work with a mapping expert who got that, and I could dig for that for you if you want to email me. I don't honestly know, and unfortunately he was, sorry.
I want to invite everyone to look at yesterday's Star Tribune. There's an article called Minnesota 1862, A Distant Mirror for Gaza 2023. It's talking about what happened here in Minnesota, the forced removal and the ethnic cleansing and the settlers taking over the land. And he makes comparisons to what's happening right now in Gaza. The other thing I want to say is the first time I ever went out to the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, I was invited by a woman from Minneapolis who was going to be sundancing there. And I drove out with my children, and I was so shocked when we got there because all the stores were owned by white people, all the gas stations were owned by white people on the reservation. And as I was trying to find my way to where the Sundance was supposed to be, nobody knew what I was talking about, what I was asking about when I would stop to ask on the reservation, on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And I would drive into these farm places, and they were all owned by white farmers. And I was like, this is the reservation. I thought they would be owned by Native people. And it was every farm I drove into to ask for directions, they didn't know what I was talking about, and it was all owned by white people.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. In South Dakota, non-Indigenous people own more than half of the Cheyenne River Reservation and more than 2/3 of Standing Rock, and that's because of these policies. I know at Cheyenne River, one of my former colleagues who was from a tribe up in the Upper Peninsula or in Michigan, when he went to Cheyenne River too, he just gasped. He was with my boss riding in the car, and he said, "I've never seen poverty like this." And he grew up in an Indian community. He says, "We've got poverty, but it's not like this poverty." Of course, Pine Ridge is shocking.
I wondered what the high priority areas were in Minnesota and other parts of the upper Midwest. I'm thinking mostly about sacred sites, and Bear Butte's an obvious one, but what are some others that are rising to the top?
I know that there's been, we do not lobby as a foundation, as a nonprofit. I know there's been some things in the press about Red Lake Reservation and trying to recover the northern part of their lake up there, where they get, I've heard it may have been in that, I think it was in that article I read in the Star Tribune, that the people that go out and they leave tons of human waste even on the lake. And when they're out ice fishing. And the Native people say, we wouldn't be doing that. We'd be taking care of the bounty up there. Of course, it's going to be a fight for them because of the walleye, and we've been through that before in the fishing cases, both in Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Are there any last questions before?
I might just add too, look out again. I can't lobby. Look out for, there were reportedly some legislation in the Minnesota legislature about some bills that might be passed. If you see something in the paper and it's in your heart to support it, that would be a good way to contribute.
There is major legislation. It's been 7 years in the making, and they're really hoping that this coming session, and it involves putting a tax, a very small fee on real estate transactions that would then go to indigenous communities. And I'll get some more information for our folks out on that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that.
I'll let Dorothea have the last word here, but I want to thank everybody for staying, for coming, and I want to thank David again for presenting.
Many.
I want to say something about a sacred site that's just north of here. We have a sacred site just north of here called Inyan Bosindada, what the Europeans named Castle Rock. And, you know, I've taken a couple of groups from church to visit there, and Gina's holding up the sign for it. And it's owned by a white farmer, I did talk to there's the organization in the cities that is trying to reclaim sacred sites, and I invited them, would you be willing to, and we'll help you work on it? And they said, go right ahead, do it, because they're so overwhelmed with what they're doing, they don't have the time or the money or whatever, but they're interested in it, and so I don't know if anything can develop out of that or not. The farmer who owns it likes to hunt on that land there. And the good news is there's a family that lives right next to it, really, really close to it, and they have cleaned it up. It was a mess because people were going out there and partying all the time and throwing beer cans and other stuff like that all around this sacred site. But this family has really cleaned it up, and they let us go through their land to get to it. And so I don't know if anything can happen with that, reclaiming that sacred site or not. There, I don't know. I have to see, I guess.
And I might mention there is work being done. There's an organization, Friends of the Falls, the old Spirit Island down by the bridge in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. I'm spacing on the name of the bridge. Yeah, the Stone Arch Bridge, down that whole beautiful, that spectacular area. It's the first place I usually take out-of-town visitors to take a look at that. So there was a very sacred island, and they're working on, right now, they're raising funds for that to do something, and the city of Minneapolis is involved. There's a coalition and of Native groups, Native peoples, and working with some various people in the city as well.
All right, thank you all for coming.